Take my bride, let's go for a ride in my newfangled automobile. Just where we will go, nobody knows, but it's sure a great way to feel. Behind the wheel of the speed meter steel, it's my newfangled automobile.
Hello and welcome to Vintage Car History. I'm Wild Bill. Sport utility vehicles, or SUVs, have become quite popular over the last 30 years or so. The idea is to have a personal vehicle, essentially a car, but with an enclosed cargo area, higher ground clearance, and sometimes four-wheel drive, so you can take it off-road if you want to. And though there are some cases where SUVs are actually used for their utility, most of the time they are used as commuter cars, soccer mom support, big shopping sprees, or for occasional family camping and fishing trips and such. True utility vehicles have been around a lot longer than SUVs, and today we're going to take a brief look at the history of the utility vehicle. Utility vehicles are designed to perform various specific functions, yet are not typically for general hire. And although some utility vehicles are much like commercial vehicles, it is this distinction that separates them. For example, a moving van is a commercial vehicle, hired to take a particular cargo from one place to another. Yet a mail delivery van is a utility vehicle. It delivers letters and parcels for many different people on a regular route. No single person hired the van. Civilizations have needed utility vehicles since their beginning. Cities require public works to survive, water and sewer services, mail delivery, road construction and repair, fire brigades. All of these services are thousands of years old and managed by their local governments. Archaeologists across the world have found both written evidence and depictions of vehicles being used for such purposes. Typically, these vehicles were basic carts or wagons, be they pulled by work animals or people, that were filled with the tools and supplies needed for whatever task was at hand. The vigils of the Roman Empire are a good example of this. Amongst their duties was to be on the lookout for fires, and they had wagons full of both buckets and sand to fight fires as needed. Other wagons were full of pitch and all the ingredients to make concrete for repairs to aqueducts and bridges. Such vehicles were not exclusive to the Roman Empire. The Greeks had similar public works centuries before the Romans did, and civilizations in India, China, and the Middle East used such public works vehicles in ancient times. And although there's not much direct evidence, it's most likely that the early civilizations in the Americas did likewise. Thus far, the utility vehicles we've looked at are fairly indistinguishable from just about any other vehicle on the road. Yet there were in the classical world some that were very specialized. Two of them stand out in particular, the pile driver and the crane. A pile driver is a mobile machine that can drive tree trunks into the ground. These were used to build bridges, dams, piers, and other such construction projects. Famously used by Julius Caesar to cross the Rhine during the Gallic War circa 54 BC, these rolling pile drivers would drive the timbers into the riverbed. From there, engineers would build a portion of the bridge between them so the pile drivers could go forward and drive more logs into the riverbed until, after repeating the process many times, a bridge was now built. And the whole spectacle of it put the fear of Rome into the Germanic tribes of the time. Cranes were, and still are for that matter, often built as vehicles. Small portable cranes could not only move cargo off of a wagon, pier, or some other platform, but were additionally very useful for civil engineering projects. They could remove rocks and other obstacles from proposed roadbeds. They could be used for repairing existing infrastructure like aqueducts and bridges, and generally provide lifting power for building structures in locations where a crane could not easily be constructed on site. Yet cranes, and pile drivers for that matter, were still powered by hands, hooves, or both. Not until the 19th century would utility vehicles develop into the vehicles we're more familiar with today. And those developments began in the 17th century. The steam engine was, of course, very important. But the development of hydraulics was particularly crucial in making utility vehicles. That really got underway through the work of the Belgian inventor and mathematician Simon Savin. Yes, he did build a wind-powered vehicle, a land yacht with 4 wheels and sails at around the year 1600, but it was his discovery and explanation of what he called the hydrostatic paradox that would revolutionize the utility world and others as well. Savin's work pretty much established the foundation of fluid mechanics. The hydrostatic paradox demonstrates how fluids apply pressure when contained. If a glass, a beaker, and a wide bowl are all filled with a liquid and they all have the same size of base, they will all have the same amount of pressure placed upon the bottom of them as long as the height of the fluid in all of them is the same. This is why it's called a paradox, because the actual volume of the liquid is not a factor, though you'd think it should be. Using this knowledge, Blaise Pascal made some more discoveries in fluid dynamics a few decades later, which established the basics of the hydraulics industry as we know it. Pascal was a French polymath with tons of discoveries and inventions to his credit. One of them was, in 1648, what is known as Pascal's law. This law of fluid dynamics states that if pressure is applied inside of a closed system, all the pressure will be transmitted equally in all directions. So, if you keep all the fluid contained within an unbreachable environment, i.e. there's no leaks, pressure applied anywhere will be equally felt everywhere else. Hydraulics had been born. Yet this principle allows amplification of the force. By changing the sizes of the fluid reservoirs, pressure placed over a large area could be concentrated into a smaller area and provide more force, as long as the containers can survive the pressures involved. This was a serious issue in the early and mid-17th century, and metallurgy would not catch up to the principle until the late 18th century. It was an English locksmith by the name of Joseph Bramah who would build and patent the first truly hydraulic machine, a press, in 1795. Of course, you need pressure to make a hydraulic press or anything else hydraulic, and the use of both pistons and pumps made this possible. Both date from at least the 1st century. Heron of Alexandria made a syringe with a piston, or at least wrote down a design that would have worked. The Nemi ships of Emperor Caligula had bilge pumps on them. They were much like modern piston pumps and were hand-operated. But these were artisan pieces. It would take the Industrial Revolution to make them commonplace. Said revolution was driven by the steam engine. The first Newcomen engines and the later Watt engines were far too large for vehicle use, but Richard Trevithick's high-pressure engine of 1801 was both small enough and powerful enough to be used in vehicles, be they rail locomotives or road-going. By the 1820s, steam-powered utility vehicles began to appear on the roads, although the roads of the time were hard-pressed to support them. The macadam road design, which came about in 1820 and is still used today, allowed roads to be built that could handle vehicles weighing 10 tons or more. And of course, vehicles were built to make such roads. By the mid-1800s, some of the most iconic utility vehicles were out there doing their public works jobs, as well as others. The first steam-powered traction engines appeared at this time, and they had many industrial and agricultural uses. Logging, land reclamation, plowing, and other jobs could be done with these machines, and with a bit of modification, could do other things as well. The steamroller is a type of traction engine, and were used to smooth the new macadam roads being built all over Europe and elsewhere. Bulldozers and graders also came about in this century, and the 3 machines could all work together to make roads very quickly. Another mid to late 19th century invention was the steam shovel. Armed with 1 or more steam engines and hydraulics, large steam shovels revolutionized mining as they could do the digging of more than 100 men. Small ones, which would eventually be known as backhoes, were crucial in building both the water and sewer systems in the modern world. With the ability to dig long and large trenches fast and do it without large amounts of manpower, these backhoes could be seen with public works crews everywhere, digging the way for underground water services, sewers, and even subways. Now, fire trucks also benefited from hydraulics at this time, though they were typically horse-drawn and not steam-powered. Yet the pumps themselves often were, and firemen would keep the boiler on the fire wagon going just in case they needed to ride out and fight a fire. These steam-powered hydraulic fire pumps could connect to a water source installed with the help of their cousins, the backhoes, and douse a building with great vigor. Internal combustion engines, both gas and steel, would be the next stage in the utility vehicle development. The very first efforts of the 1890s and 1900s in this direction involved mail and police vehicles. Unsurprisingly, it was France that, in 1896, a postal service began to use cars to deliver mail, in their case using both Peugeot and Panhard models. Within a few years, many other nations in Europe and in the USA, cars were converted into light mail trucks to test their mettle. Electric cars were tested as well, and though they worked well for some light in-city routes, they proved not to be particularly satisfactory for mail delivery service. Police vehicles came about pretty much simultaneously. Electric cars actually fared better for police work since they didn't need to be on a route per se, but rather on call. Indeed, the first police car was electric and built by the Baker Company in Cleveland and was in service in Akron, Ohio by 1899. It also served as an ambulance, being amongst the first of that particular type of motorized utility vehicle. But as patrol cars grew in importance, again, gas cars won the battle for both police and ambulance work. Fire engines were, for the most part, still horse-drawn through to the early 1900s. Such engines were expensive pieces of kit, and most fire departments were loath to replace them with gas or diesel-powered trucks when what they had was still quite serviceable. Walter Christie offered a solution by building a fire tractor, a front-wheel drive vehicle that could replace the horses. But this was only a temporary solution, and by World War I, many companies, Vauxhall, Mack, Peugeot, American LaFrance, and others, were building true fire trucks, and by the end of the war, fire trucks as we know them today had become the standard. The development of continuous track utility vehicles actually goes back to the 1830s. They got their start in England and were used primarily for agricultural purposes. Quite a number of inventors, both in England and the US, over the decades of the 19th century, improved upon the design, and by the 1900s, vehicles with such tracks were all over farms, logging camps, public works projects, and road crews. The most famous of these was the design of Benjamin Holt, who, at the suggestion of a soldier who observed a trial of his tractor in 1907, called it a Caterpillar track. The name stuck, and Caterpillar is still to this day the largest manufacturer of tracked utility vehicles in the world. And of course, there's the diesel engine. These engines became commercially available in the last years of the 19th century, and by 1910 were powering all kinds of utility vehicles. Diesels produce planet-pulling torque, and for a large, heavy vehicle needing to traverse terrain that is questionable at best, they are perfectly suited to the task. Diesels rapidly began to replace steam engines for utility use, having enough power to not only move the machine, but to power the hydraulics that are often attached to them. Cranes, bucket lifters, bulldozers, and other construction vehicles, farm vehicles, mining trucks, and shovels. By World War I, the diesel engine had proved to be the power plant of choice for large utility vehicles and remains so to this day. So when you really think about it, the term sport utility vehicle is really an oxymoron. Perhaps sport recreation vehicle would be more appropriate. Utility is all about getting work done, whether it's a large job on a particular site or a task that is spread across the landscape. Utility vehicles do the heavy work that keeps the modern world running. Thanks for watching Vintage Car History, and we'll see you next week. Peace.